Welcome to the Red Dad Podcast,
where we'll be exploring the trials and triumphs of being a father, men's mental health,
and any other topic that inspires us to be rad.
Through a series of interviews, your host, Jace Kelly, will be discussing and discovering the best ways to become a rad dad. Now your host, Jace.
All right, thanks for joining us for episode 6 of the Rad Dad Podcast. I have Chris Biesinger here. Thanks for joining me. You agreed probably about a week ago to be on the podcast.
I did.
I've known you, I want to say over 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's
close, right?
Pretty close. Yeah. Are you 28?
I'm 30.
You're 30, so I've known you probably 22 years. Yeah, because I think James started wrestling when he was 7, and that's,
Yep.
I think, when we met.
Yeah, so my dad and you and a few other wrestling dads had a little group where we traveled and all the boys wrestled together. So we've had some big laughs, awesome memories, and lessons learned together. So it's good to have you on the podcast.
Absolutely, thank you.
So just to jump into it, I don't really know anything about your background, your upbringing. Where did you grow up? How was your upbringing? Just tell me a little bit about that.
To be in Spanish Fork, I still have to be proud of, I'm a Red Devil.
Are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
1988 Red Devil. Yeah. So it was nice growing up in Springville. I think Springville has a swagger, and it has got to be in the water.
Yeah.
But I was raised by a general contractor. My dad has a master's degree in thermal geology, but the jobs available to him when he graduated was mostly exploratory geology, looking for oil in Saudi Arabia or the Gobi Desert in China. It meant being away from home a lot, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted to be a dad, first, and a geologist second. And the jobs just weren't available that were kept him in the home. So he kept doing what he was doing that got him through graduate school as a general contractor, a carpenter. And so I was pretty much raised, I remember being on the job site as much as I was at home.
Yeah.
Dad would just drop his nail apron wherever he was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, come down the truck. My brothers and I had come out of the school, and we'd climb in the back of the truck because there's only 2 seat belts in the front if you ever wore them, and usually they had fallen down behind the seat.
Yeah.
So 2 kids would climb in the front, the other one get in the back, and with the dog, and we'd go back to the job site. I remember as a little kid just cleaning nails out of 2x4s, throwing rocks and broken brick ends out of window wells, cleaning up shingle wrappers, ever since I was teeny. So by the time I came home from my mission, I was able to sit for and pass the general contractor's license. So I was raised on a construction site, which is odd because that's not a thing now. You don't have kids on a construction site.
No.
And so when I became a dad, I felt a little taken back and a little disappointed that I couldn't raise my kids the same way my dad had raised me, right by my side, kind of like you and Lincoln, where he's your little shadow. He goes wherever you go.
Yeah.
I did the same thing. My brothers did the same thing with my dad. We learned to pour concrete, finish concrete, lay out a floor, lay out a wall, frame a house, cut in a valley, cut in trusses, all while I was in high school. And so when I came home on my mission, I thought I'd be a general contractor. But one thing led to another, and that's not the direction I went. But I still felt like I was doing my children a disservice of not being there to raise them and being as much as an influence in their life as their mom is and was. And that's where wrestling came in. We signed up for Little League Wrestling because why not, right? I didn't wrestle in high school. My brother,
you had no idea what
no clue.
The world of wrestling.
Well, my brothers did.
Okay.
My brothers wrestled, but we played football. We were on the high school football teams. And after football season, my brothers would go wrestle, but I loved to debate. So I joined the debate team. and I did extemporaneous speaking and on the debate squad through the wintertime while they were wrestling, and then we do screw around at track in the spring. But when James was 7, and I think Jake was 4, and Joe was just 3, we signed up for Spanish Fork Wrestling. They went down and did their wrestling thing. I was not heavily involved, but 6 weeks later, at the end, they both came home with second place medals. And I was so proud. I mean, I was amazingly proud. Turns out there was only 3 kids in the bracket, and one of them was just getting over the flu. But the idea that they came home was like, wow. And they were proud and they were excited. And at that point, I thought, well, maybe this is something. So we joined the Diamondbacks, which was the team that your dad founded and coached forever. And what I found was that was an answer to prayer. That was an answer to what I was seeking for. Because I would come home from work, I'd throw the kids in the Suburban, we'd go down to the gym there at Spanish Fork High School, that little gym, and we'd roll all night long. We'd roll for 3 hours. And what I learned was that physical touch with my sons and that struggle with my sons, and to be there and learning something with them, right on the mat with them, filled that void that I didn't have taking my kids to work. And it really worked with our family on multiple fronts, but especially the fact that my wife bought in because the house was empty for 2 to 3 hours almost every night.
I was going to ask you how she handled it, but that makes so much sense.
So at first, it was way cool.
Yeah.
And then when the kids started getting more and more muscular and older, and it wasn't just 3-year-olds going out and hugging and then falling down and rolling around on the mat, when it started to become violence, probably too strong of a word, but you've certainly
controlled violence,
dished out, and you've certainly dished out your share of violence and been the recipient of your share of violence, because that's wrestling, right? When that started to happen, it was like, boy, then the mama bear starts getting nervous, and she would always have to probably film, because then she was concentrating on something else as opposed to watching her son dominate or be dominated on the wrestling mat. It turns out that closeness of watching your son get totally destroyed, and there's nothing you can do about it except taking back to the wrestling gym the next Monday night and start again. And say, okay, this is where we got off track. This is where we went wrong. We can go back to the drawing board and prepare. It takes you back to an old SHS Red Devil saying that along the lines of preparation precedes power. The way I was raised.
So there are a lot of similarities between sports or athletics and work ethic or learning to work, which I believe in kids learning to work at a young age, right? What are your thoughts on this, on the newer generation coming up? Statistically speaking, there are more screens and more downtime and more sitting in their lives. What's your advice as a parent to help people get more active, to help other parents get their kids active?
I don't think the secret of success has changed with any generation. I think it's like being beat up on the wrestling mat. You just got to go back to the drawing board and go back to the basics of how do you build a base. I mean, that is such a powerful statement. How do you build a base? Wrestlers do it. The best wrestlers build the best bases. The best homes are the best bases. The best military operations have the best bases. You build a base, and from that base, then all other operations are possible. And I've thought about this when you invited me to do this podcast on how do you raise successful children, especially as times are changing. Times are changing, but the base doesn't change. Honestly, doing a podcast like this, I have to admit and recognize who I am. I mean, I am deeply LDS. All of the way I judge myself and the way I rate myself, the way I critique myself is all on an LDS base and on LDS metrics. And I have to go back to 2nd Nephi, where man is that man might be happy. Man is that man might have joy. And in order to have joy, man has to act. Man can't be happy if man is acted upon. And in order to act, you have to have choices. You have to have options.
Yeah.
And without options, you can't be happy. And the pursuit of those various options is where I think happiness comes from. I see at work a lot. I do gastroenterology for a living. I'm the nurse practitioner with Revere Healthcare, and I've been practicing gastroenterology now for more than 20 years. And so I deal a lot with liver failure and substance abuse and hepatitis C, and which results from frustration, I think. Alcoholism, people don't set out to become alcoholics. They set out to alcohol or heroin use or any vice, I think, frequently stems from just deep frustration of feeling limited and not having options. And when you don't have options, and if you don't have options, then you can't act. If you can't act, you're acted upon. And if you're acted upon, you develop this lemur mentality. That's how I talk with my patients. We're going to move you from the lemur locus, wherein you are just waiting for the next leopard to come along and maul you or eat you. We're going to move you from that lemur mentality to the leopard mentality. You don't sit in a tree and wait for the next bad thing to happen. You've got to be out killing and eating. You've got to be the leopard and decide, what am I going to do today? Where am I going today? What am I going to eat today? It's not, am I going to be fed today? It's no, what am I going to eat today? And I think that's the secret of raising happy kids. And I think that's the secret of being happy in my life, is being able to pursue different options, knowing that as I pursue those options, I am creating. And therein lies another topic. If man can't create something, if man can't build something, man isn't happy.
I completely agree with that, and it goes back to the scriptures where idle hands are the devil's workshop, right?
For sure.
And just thinking back to myself and a lot of my friends, a lot of wrestlers played other sports, had other things. I mean, I was always busy, right? And I feel like you raise your kids the same way. They were always doing something, because when they're sitting there and there's just not something to work towards, that becomes dangerous territory.
Absolutely. Joe and Chris always kept you busy.
Yeah.
It seems like when you guys would leave the wrestling gym at night, practicing NCAA wrestling, you were just going up to do the judo and the kung. You just went from
piano lessons.
You just went from one gym to the next.
No, you're right.
Simply pursuing something with a different set of rules.
Yeah, but I've noticed it's been a huge blessing because it's rolled over into my adult life. I had my dad on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we talked about the lessons learned and the memories made through athletics, and it's rolled over into the success I've had in my adult life and keeping busy, working towards something always. And I feel like that's always been able to push away the bad thoughts, the negative thoughts, the self-doubts, because for me, there's just not room for self-doubt when I'm working towards something, right?
I think you just nailed it on the head. Exactly. That self-doubt only creeps in when you think you're defeated and you don't have any other options.
Yeah.
You don't have any other choices.
So how does a parent teach this to their kids, and is there a window to do so? Or can it be taught to teenagers?
That's a fascinating question. Lori and I have raised 5 kids. I mean, Josh is a senior, and I don't know that there was a set of boxes to check going down raising kids. It was just the principle, and then the boxes would fall into place once we set to the principle of provide these kids options, give them experiences that they can decide who and what they want to be, but always give them options. I don't see a downside necessarily to spending money to raise your children on hobbies that they may or may not pick up. And I guess I'm blessed that we had the financial means to, when the kids would come and say, I want to try this, we were able to support them in that. And then they've kind of decided what they're good at and what they like, what their interests are, and been able to pursue it.
I think I love that. And I know my parents made big sacrifices for us to travel and wrestle and get our black belts and do all this stuff. But I feel like it taught us kids it gave us the confidence that we could do hard things. And especially in adulthood, it seems like trying something new is more risky, especially when you have a wife and a kid. It's like it may be more risky to go get a new job or to start your own business, but if you have that confidence and you're confident in yourself and your ability to try new things, there can be a really big upside to that.
That is also another one of these, the culture that we live in this LDS culture of we've got to teach our kids to do hard things. And you've spent a lifetime doing that, of one thing, and you and James right along there, and Jake, of having your kids do hard things. Now we're back to the wrestling. After they just got their butts kicked on that first round, they have to go back out on that round, back out on the mat and face that kid that just trashed them in the first round, and they're down 10-0, and they're bloody, and they're broken, and their muscles are strained, and they're hurt. It doesn't matter. You've got 2 more rounds you've got to get through. I remember one day it couldn't have been more than 10 degrees outside. Probably in the single digits, and the Spanish Fork wind was howling. Yep. It was during the Christmas break, and we were out putting the sheeting on one of the barns, and Jacob didn't want to be there, and he took a self-drilling screw to put it through the steel sheeting and into the steel angle iron to attach the sheeting to the barn, and it slipped off and it smashed his finger. And you know how when your hands are already cold and you smash your finger and it splits open wide and it starts to bleed and it hurts like crazy. Yeah. And I remember looking at his eyes, and our eyes met, and there was something in there. And I think it was that moment when Jacob realized he had other options than working with his hands in 8-degree weather in a 40-mile-an-hour wind. And I think that's the day he decided that he was going to be a PhD. And now look at him. He's at Ohio State doing a PhD in deep space propulsion. I mean, he's a rocket scientist at Ohio State. And it was saying, if this is not the option that I want, he knew enough at that point in his life that he was going to create other options for himself.
Yeah.
And that's back to that point you just made of, I can start a business. I can do hard things. I don't have to be a lemur in the tree waiting for something to happen to me. I am going to kill and eat. I am going to hunt. I am going to act and not be acted upon. And that's the key. These kids need to be taught that they are to act. They don't have to wait for things to come to them.
So I want to pick your brain a little bit because I feel like we have a lot of similarities in this. So in my adult life, there's been times where I feel like I need a challenge. So, I've ran a few half marathons. I've started multiple businesses. Mm-hmm. Those all sprouted from my need to be challenged. Now, I know you feel that same need, and you're a few steps ahead of me. What are some of the things that you've done to challenge yourself physically or emotionally, mentally?
We can go back to that running thing. I remember mowing the lawn one day, and the bishop ran by on a jog Saturday morning, and I remember being critical of him in my head. I was thinking, as busy that guy is, why would he choose to waste an hour of his Saturday morning going for a run? Well, 6 months later, I was called to take his position.
Really?
Yeah, and I remember needing to find a place wherein I could just be by myself. And I found that running was it. Because if somebody calls the house, is the bishop home? Yeah, just a minute, I'll get him. Or, no, he's out for a run. Would you like to join him? Oh, it'll wait. You always had that me time, that private time where people would choose not to come invade your time. And I learned that running, I remember starting out that first time to go for a jog, and I ran down to the end of the street, which is like 0.3 of a mile, and I was blown up. I just walked home.
Yeah.
Well, about 6 weeks later, I remember running 3 miles without stopping. And I thought I'd saved China. I came in, walked into the house. I felt like I was the hero. I'd run 3 miles without stopping. And then it became, okay, if I can run 3, can I run 5? If I can run 5, can I run a half marathon? If I can run a half marathon, can I run a full marathon? So I signed up for a half marathon. And my first half marathon, at the end of it, I just laid there on the grass thinking, oh, I have destroyed my body. I will never be the same. I couldn't walk. Lori had to pick me up off the grass and help me to the car, and I went home, and I really thought I had permanently ruined myself. But I'd already signed up for my first full marathon. So I thought, well, I'll just recover, and we'll try the first marathon. Well, at my first full marathon at 13.1 miles, I was flying. I was flying. I didn't hurt at all. I was holding a 7:10 pace. I was flying. When I got to the end of that marathon, I laid there on the grass and thought I was going to die.
Yeah.
And thought that I had permanently injured my body and it would never work again. But I'd signed up for my first 50. And so at my first 50 miles, at 35 miles, I was flying. Nothing hurt. I was flying. When I got to the end of that 50 miles, I thought I was dead. I thought my body was permanently injured and I'd never run again. But I'd signed up for my first 100. And so at mile 65, on my first 100 mile, I was flying. I felt amazing. I was flying. Nothing hurt. I couldn't wait to come through the aid stations, get hydrated again, and go again. At 82 miles on this 100-mile marathon, a pack of coyotes started following me.
Wow.
And that's a thing, especially for a country boy, because as soon as a country boy steps out of the truck, coyotes scatter. Coyotes are never around because that's target practice. And to have them little devils following me, because they knew I was in trouble. And when I got home from that 100-miler, I had to get in the tub with my socks on and soak them because there was no clear delineation where my tissue ended and the sock started. So I had to soak them off, and the top layer of my skin just went off with them, which is a learning thing. You should always change your socks several times during a 100-mile marathon because the dirt grinds into your skin, and then it creates this barrier that you don't know which is flesh and which is cotton. Anyway.
And you had signed up for your 200.
No, I haven't done a 200. I've rode my bike from Oceanside to Annapolis. That was a 6-day gig, but that was our Ragnar. We didn't all run it at the same time. We Ragnar'd it. But I've done Logan to Jackson half a dozen times. But
so my question is why? You're a busy person. You have a family. Why would you do that?
I think for the reward. I think for the reward at the end of the day, and sense of accomplishment that this looked like an impossible task. It looks like it wasn't a thing, but I've done other things in my life that looked like an impossible task. Why not try this one?
So how is that translated into the way you live your life, your callings, your work, your relationships?
And that's a very good question. Because, I don't know if it is I don't know if it's I'm getting older or if it's because the kids have left the house and my responsibility for them is waning. But my desire to run 100-mile marathons and ride 200-mile bike rides and do Ironman and all that, my desire to do that isn't as keen or as acute as it was.
Interesting.
And maybe it's because I don't feel that desire to set the bar. My kids are out there doing it now for themselves. I still have a desire to create. I have a desire to create. I threw my hat in the ring recently and said I would, except I haven't been, the assignment has not come, but I did throw my hat in the ring to take command of the National Guard unit that I serve in, because I do have a vision there. I would like to create something that's already amazing, something that's already very competent, but to add my contribution to it. I do have a deep desire to do that.
I want to get your thoughts on, so you have this big resume, all these things you've accomplished in your life, and I know it could not be done without a supportive spouse.
Oh, absolutely.
So did you have, when you were looking for a spouse when you were younger, did you have a checklist, or was it more like you met your spouse and you're like, this is exactly what I want? And how has your relationship and your support for each other developed through the years?
We moved into Lori's ward when I was 13, and her dad was our bishop. And it was a newlywed or nearly dead ward. Okay. My brothers and I were the only Aaronic priesthood in the ward, for the most part. There's a few others, but we always had to have elders and high priests help us pass the sacrament. There was never enough deacons to pass the sacrament. There's only a handful of us. And Lori, and the young women were the same. So Lori and I just became friends because she was the only counterpart female in the young men, young women organization. And I remember that she kind of became, I don't know, more of a sister, a good friend. I didn't know that I liked her at the time because I used to steal her stuffed animals and then cut a finger off or an ear off and then send it back to her in the mail and say, if you want the rest of it, you're going to have to bring cookies or cake or something for her ransom.
Okay.
And she'd love that, and she'd come get her stuffed animal and sew the appendage back on. But I got my cookies or my cake, and that relationship went on for a couple of years until it became time to date, and I was so bashful. Dating wasn't a thing. I was so afraid. And Laura, my mom said, well, why don't you ask out Lori? And I said, ooh, gross. No way. Well, I did. And and that kind of one thing led to another. And we've been married now 30 years. But what I found in her was I liked the fact that let's go back to an LDS theme. There's the Mary and the Martha. My wife is all Martha. She is anxiously engaged in making things better for others. She's heavily involved in everything. She's never sitting around. She's always somewhere making things better, cleaning things up, preparing for something. And I just liked that. I liked the fact that she was looking out for others. I also found her extremely attractive, not just physical, but I've always been attracted to intelligent women. Women were smarter than me, were hot. I just look at them in class and think, wow, that's pretty. When they have the answers to questions or they could solve a math problem. And Lori has a degree from the University of Utah in mathematics. There isn't an equation, a math equation, that she can't figure out, and that's translated into Jacob working on a PhD in physics. There isn't a math problem he's afraid of. He can sit down and say, "Oh, I can solve that." No matter what squiggly lines or letters are being used, he's, "Oh, I can solve that." And that confidence that Lori had growing up, I think, translated into my kids.
Interesting. So she's supported you in all your crazy endeavors.
Yeah.
Talk to me about joining the military. How old were you? Just give me the breakdown of that story. And the 19th Special Forces, there's only 2 Special Operations, Special Forces, National Guard units. The other Special Forces are all full-time. The first group, 5th group, 7th group, 10th group. The 2 National Guard groups that are Special Forces are the 19th and the 20th. And the 19th is based here in Utah. And these Green Berets put up a giant role play. Years ago, back at Fort Bragg, they did a role play wherein the Green Berets were out on what they call a Robin Sage, which is it's the final exam on how you would conduct yourself behind enemy lines. There's a lot more to it than that, but it's essentially how you would conduct yourself in a 12-man team against an entire nation, essentially, and how you'd build your response to the objectives of your country. Okay.
And they were out operations at night. They came in contact with the Highway Patrol. The Highway Patrol wasn't in on that this is a role play or a training operation. The Highway Patrolman felt threatened and shot and killed one of our Green Berets. And at that point, the policy went out, no one is not in on this. Everybody's in on any activity. So back in 2014, the 19th Special Forces put together a big role play down in Sanpete County, wherein a CIA agent went in, got elected. I mean, everybody's in on this. They know why he's there, but he went in, CIA agent gets elected to the city council. He finds out who's pro-mayor, who's not mayor, went into this country to decide how we're going to do special operations stuff for the betterment and forward the interests of the United States of America. Well, I get this phone call saying, "I understand you're a local physician that can't stand the mayor of Mount Pleasant." And I said, "Well, I'm a local nurse practitioner and I have no idea who the mayor of Mount Pleasant is, but I'll bite. What do you want?" And they said, "Well, we need a white knight. We need a local doc that can help force multiply our teams that are setting up an overthrow of this regime in Mount Pleasant and in Manti. And we'd like you to come in and be a local shaman, a local doc that can help us with our wounded." And I said, "Well, absolutely. I'd love to do that." And they said, "Well, do you have a transport or somewhere to haul patients?" I said, "Well, I've got a horse trailer." And they said, "Perfect, bring the horse trailer." So I show up, I go down, amazing things that I signed a disclaimer that I'm not supposed to talk about, even all these years later, on how I operated and what I did and all that kind of stuff. But I got to a point where I was supposed to be and where I was supposed to wait, and then these 2 guys in ghillie suits. I'd been sitting there 15 minutes. I'd gone up and gone over and peed on the fence. And got back in the truck, and right past where I'd walked, 2 guys stand up in ghillie suits. And I hadn't seen them. And I thought, whoa, that's amazing. And they said, "You're obviously the guy we're looking for. Go to these next coordinates." And then they just disappeared into the forest. Well, I went to the next coordinates, and there was a quote-unquote firefight going on. And there was moulage guys all over the place down the bottom of a ravine. And they said, okay, Doc, go down and help us haul these guys out on a stretcher. So I went down and I put one across my back. I carried him up. I laid him in the horse trailer. I went back down, put another one over my back, carried him up, put him in the horse trailer. And as I laid him down, I said, all right, gentlemen, when you feel yourselves go across the horse trailer, you're only about 10 minutes from the safe house. Because I'd already been to the safe house and I knew where we're going. And it was, if I didn't have to think about it, Henry. It was General Henry now, but at the time, I think he was Lieutenant Colonel Henry. And he said to me, who told you to tell them about going over the cattle guard and they're only 10 minutes from the safe house? And I didn't know who he was. I didn't know the difference between a lieutenant colonel and a private. And I feel bad now because I was kind of flippant. And I said, have you ever rode on your back in a horse trailer? And he says, I imagine it's uncomfortable. I said, yeah, these guys are going to want to know how much they have left. And he took that in and was thinking about me. And I kind of blew him off. And I got in the truck, and by this time it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, and I backed the horse trailer out through this little 2-track up onto the main road, and then we drove to the safe house. And he came up to me at the safe house, and he said, who taught you how to back a horse trailer? I said, come on, every cowboy, any country boy can back a horse trailer. And he said, why aren't you doing this with us full time? And I said, I'm too old for that. And he said, clearly you're not too old. You just put 200-pound guys on your back and carried them up independently and laid them in the horse trailer. You're not too old. And I said, well, you couldn't afford me. And he said, no, that's probably true. We can't. But that doesn't mean we don't need you. And he said it with such sincerity that it caught me up. So at 46 years of age, I joined the Utah National Guard, went to basic training, went to jump school, went to airborne school, went to flight surgeon training, gone to all the training. I've checked all the boxes, and now I have the honor to serve as a flight surgeon with U.S. Special Forces, Special Operations Command. And the Sundays that I'm not at church, I'm jumping out of a Black Hawk or a CH-47 or a C-130, being the personal doc for a Special Operations company and battalion. And I love it. It's extremely fulfilling.
So, did they have to jump some hoops to get you in it?
Yeah,
46 years old.
I did. Yeah, the oldest you can go in is 42. But in the military, there's waivers for everything.
Yeah.
If they need it, they get it. I mean, there's a waiver for it. So yeah, I had to go through some waivers, and I had to pass the physical fitness tests and what have you. But I was able to do that.
And looking back on that decision, what are your thoughts? Like, are you just like, this is awesome and I love it?
In my job as a nurse practitioner with gastroenterology, I often take care of injured people, injured and recovering people. And the satisfaction of that is creating and building back what they should be. They're not what they should be, but I can help them. I can assist them to get back to where they're supposed to be. And therein lies the pleasure and what keeps you coming back. With taking care of a bunch of Green Berets and Special Operations and Special Forces soldiers, I'm taking care of men and women that stepped forward and said, there are things that go bump in the night, and we are who bump back. We are the ones that will stand up and say, including my very life, I will defend this nation. And it's a pleasure to be able to care for them. And it's an honor to put my stethoscope on their chest and on their back. And it's an honor for me to put my hands on them and heal a wound and prescribe a medicine. Or it's an honor for them to come and put their faith in me. Mm-hmm. It's habit forming. I can't wait to get back. The first time I got back from my very first guard experience, I'd worked a 55, 60-hour week. I'd left my job, come home, got something to eat, got a couple hours of sleep because I had to be on the drill floor at like 4 a.m. So I got very little sleep. I came home Sunday night just exhausted. And my wife, Lori, said to me, "Oh, honey, have we made a horrible mistake? Can you do 2 jobs?" And I made a tactical error. I started to grin and beam and said, honey, I haven't been working. I've been out in heavy equipment with 50 caliber, fully automatic weapons, and Uncle Sam's been not only paying for it, but he's been paying me to do it.
Yeah.
And ever since then, she doesn't even bat an eye when I get home being up straight for 96 hours because she knows I'm out enjoying myself. I mean, not screwing around. That's too strong of a word. Although there are some days where I think to myself, I'm ministering to and caring for some of the finest people in America, and I have the privilege of doing this, and I'm not tired. I'm not tired.
So how have you been able to never settle up to this point in your life? Because so many people get stuck in a career or a mindset, or they feel like they're in a rut for so long. It seems like you just haven't settled. There's always been the next thing. Was that taught to you at a young age, or is it a personality trait?
That's a good question. The next thing. I think what comes to my mind is I do get depressed. I do get down. I get discouraged. I get frustrated. I think my antidote to that is the run. When I go out for a run, I never run with earpods, never. I want to be alone with my thoughts, and I want to commune with the Spirit and with eternity, and I want to be alone with the powers greater than me. And I always come back off a run feeling better, optimistic, with another vision of another. I come back with another option. Mm-hmm. When I get depressed, I get discouraged, and I think I don't have any options, I go for a run, and that's every night. I've set a rule that I get 5 miles in every day, unless there's something else more important, and rarely there is, so I usually get my 5 miles in every night, 10 on the weekends, sometimes 10 on the weeknights, depending on the time I have. But I come back with another idea. And as soon as I have that other idea, it burns in you, and you think, okay, what could be? What could be? As far as the next thing, I think that's probably curiosity.
Yeah.
I don't know where it comes from, other than maybe, like we talked about before, having so much joy in the last success, you think, I want to do that again, whatever it may be.
So with all this going on, it seems like running is a major tool that you use to balance everything, right?
Yeah.
Everything comes together on that run.
Yeah, everything comes together.
Yeah. How and when do you find time to build your relationship with your wife and your marriage?
Growing up, I would always take the kids either down to the wrestling gym. I'd always take them. So that gave her some time, some quiet time on her own. Or I had a double jogger, and I put the kids in the jogger. Again, freeing up time wherein when I came home off a run, she wasn't frazzled. She'd had time to decompress and to relax and to do some things that she needed to do and wanted to do. So when I came home, she was always in a better mood. In fact, that's kind of become the joke in our house, is when somebody gets irritated and angry and hard to live with, they usually accuse me of being that guy, but we all know that it's anybody in the house.
Yeah.
They put my shoes on the hearth, which means, Dad, go for a run. Because if I go for a run, I come back happy. Everybody else comes back happy. Lori's had 45 minutes to an hour to be alone, and she's back happy, and the house is better. I think the goals that we've had together mesh. Even these ultra marathons, Lori would always pit crew for me. And a 100-mile marathon takes at least 24 to 30 hours, and sometimes you need an extra pair of socks or a sandwich or a Gatorade. Yeah. And so often these marathons, especially ones I sign up for, are through the mountains. And so she gets a kick out of, at 1 o'clock in the morning, in the Suburban, locked into four-wheel drive, on this mountain 20 miles from nowhere, in the dark, never been there before, locked into four-wheel drive because these roads are not pavement by any means. And then she'll come into this meadow on a coordinates and wait. And within an hour, I come stumbling out of the forest. She flashes the lights at me. I go over and eat a sandwich. She has this sense of accomplishment of linking up with me in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night, a needle in the haystack. And so it's been fun for her too. Again, to make sure that I was taken care of.
That's awesome. One last question just to wrap this up. If there's one lesson that your kids could learn from you, what would that lesson be?
Oh, that Jesus is the Christ, and that I have a testimony of the Savior, and that He knows who I am, and He created me, therefore He created them to be successful. That is what I would want them to know. They are not delivered into this world in defeat, augmandino, nor does failure course in their veins. They are lions, and they are to understand that they are lions, and that they are to act and not to be acted upon. They are to hunt, not be fed. They are to create, not destroy. And if every choice that they make is based upon those facts, they'll be happy.
I love it. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts, your experiences, and being an inspiration to people that you come in contact with in your life. So thanks for having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Jace, it's sweet of you. Thank you.